everyone, welcome to Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world who wish to pursue their career in art. I'm your host Niharika, and on this show you will hear artists talk about their lives and the choices they had to make in pursuit of arts. We will also get to use some tips and key learnings from the lives of these artists, along with a detailed discussion on their areas of interest. So quickly hop onto a journey into the world of arts along with us. I am curious to know, however, just one tiny bit of information on this. Why do you think has it been easier for artists to just say that, or just dancers who teach Bharatanatyam per se, to say that, this is a 2000-year-old tradition and that this has been going on forever, versus to talk about the fact that there were issues in the way that this form was being promoted and performed. And hence, when the form was separated, when the dance was separated from these sexual exploitations and other ways of engaging with, with other men, and also the idea of young children being sent off for these sexual favors, when you separate these two, the form was then taken out and tweaked and changed to sort of be able to present I would say, create a medium through which dance could be performed for multiple things, sans the sexual aspects of it, right? So, why do you think is it difficult for dancers? Because I have been part of a dance class myself. I've known people who teach. It's very simply just finished in one line. The Devadasis, and it's as if the Devadasis personally created this system where they could be exploited, their children could be exploited, and it's like Devadasis are at fault, when in reality it's the system that was created wherein these Devadasis were put, and these roles were established for them. Why don't we talk about it in depth, and why are not the men held responsible? Because I'm sorry to say this, the men are the ones who are perpetrating it. They are the ones who are looking for such sexual favors, and hence it exists. What if the men said, no, we don't want to? And what if the men did not have the need for it in the first place? Do we think that it would have still existed? These are questions, but my bigger question is, why is it not talked about? Like, why is it easy for anybody to just say it's a 2000-year-old tradition and brush aside the fact that there was actually something very dark that was existing in the historical time before independence?
Well, there's a very persistent kind of charm or intoxication to that 2000-year-old story, because I have the feeling that even when I said I fell in love with it, I fell in love with it thinking that it's this 2000-year-old tradition. That was part of the aura that Bharatanatyam had at that time. And certainly the Kalakshetra story about the origins of Bharatanatyam didn't include very much about the sexual exploitation of women. It did say that it had fallen into disrepute during these 2000 years, but it didn't go much into that detail about that. So I think it's very attractive, that story. That I think that's one of the reasons why it persists. It's a much easier story to tell, and it doesn't involve you questioning your own attitudes and your own morality, because the complicated story means that you have to look at how the Hindu temple is a site of exploitation, and you can't just go and worship in the temple and be completely devoted to this without looking at its um, systems and hierarchies and the way that it functions and the caste system that's built into it. Because of course you have to remember also that it was a high caste, low caste way of exploitation. So it's much easier to say 2,000-year-old tradition and then not even look at where you fit into that system of um, the hegemony system, where what your place in it is. And it, it's the same with any of those things. We don't want to look at our own bad actions. We only want to look at other people's bad actions. And we want to say, oh, he did a wrong thing, but you don't want to say, I did a wrong thing. And so I think it's much easier to do that. And I know that when I came and I performed in the West, that again, to the West, it was very charming, the story of 2,000-year-old. And it goes on and on and on, with whether it's yoga, whether it's Ayurveda, whether it's kalaripayat, whether it's Bharatanatyam, anything that comes from India, you'll see that it relies completely on tradition. Some mention of a long history will come into the story someplace. You don't go for Ayurveda. I mean, you don't go for an aspirin because it has a long tradition. You go for an aspirin whether it works or not. And instead you go for Ayurveda because it has a long tradition. And I would like to see Bharatanatyam talked about in those terms. It's such a beautiful, magnificent dance form. I love it. I love so many things about it. I love varnams. I love tilanas. And I would like to see it spoken of in its beauty, the beauty of its forms, the way the structures work, and not, oh, it's because it's 2,000 years old. And I think it's one of the things that I mean, they talk about Kudiyatam all the time, 2,000 years old, 2,000 years old. And somehow it seems to me it's because Kudiyatam itself is somehow failing. Why do you need to talk about whether it's 2,000? Who cares if it's 2,000 years old? Is it attractive to you? Are you able to get audiences? Are you able to communicate with audiences and make them experience what it is like to be in an audience, and what it is about live dancing that is so compelling? And I think Bharatanatyam has gotten to that point where we can talk about it in those terms. It has a universal reach. People all over the world do Bharatanatyam, love Bharatanatyam, and we just don't need to think about whether it's 2,000 years old anymore.
You're absolutely right. I have also observed and heard this a lot, that this. I also call this an Orientalist view, because they seem to somehow think that all of everything that's coming from the East, for them, East
Mm.
is somehow to be fossilized and put in the way that it's there, it's existed, and it cannot be modified or restructured or reshaped or any of the that we can think about, and somehow hence it needs to exist in the form that it is. And I am afraid, like, while worldwide Bharatanatyam is being promoted and performed and recognized, within our own country I see that the interest and the likeness towards Bharatanatyam, and also the desire to understand the different kinds of meanings that get conveyed in a performance, the kind of interest that is there to get delve deeper into Bharatanatyam is definitely reducing. Because today,
Mm.
if you go into a school space and if you ask them if the students would like to learn any of the Indian classical dance forms, most likely answer is no. You give them ballet or hip hop or any other dance form, and they'll jump right at the opportunity and would want to perform it. And as an educator, as a dancer, as somebody who's learned a form for 15 years or maybe even more for that matter, where do I stand? How do I find a way to detach myself from this notion of keeping it the way it is, but rather being able to modify it and deliver it to the younger generation so that it appeals to them? Because if you keep it fossilized, it will not survive for another 100 years, and then nobody would know what Bharatanatyam is anymore, let alone perform it, practice it or talk about it. uh, for Bharatanatyam, luckily we do have an extended audience across the world. But a lot of the folk forms, a lot of the other classical dance forms do not have the same reach, and hence
Mm.
they are now at a point where they're losing that kind of a support that they had garnered in the past, where people would just want to learn, go to their gurus, and stay with them and try to get all of that learning into themselves. And even for you, for example, you went out of your way to learn kalaripayat. And even today, I remember 2 years back when you and I had a conversation, you said that I'm going to go back to my guru in Calicut and I'm going to do a little bit of a session on kalaripayat, and then I'm going to head back to, I'm going to go to my next destination. I remember having this conversation with you, and the desire to come back to learn kalaripayat came from your own interests and your attachment with the form, and that has taken years. But imagine somebody who has not had that kind of experience at all and is only hearing that this is a 2000-year-old form, and does not necessarily get to know anything else about it. If that's the only conversation you have about a dance form, I fear that that is only going to make people disinterested, because it doesn't sort of create that kind of a desire for people to learn. You talk about choreography, you talk about the way that these items are designed and structured, and what is the beauty in it. I think that's essentially the pedagogical approach of it is lacking in our um, in all of the studios and different studios, because I have personally attended a few dance classes of other teachers as well. And the only reason it is taught, especially to the young girls, is to develop discipline in them. And then after a point, because there is no such strong relationship that is formed between the dancer and the form, there is a very high tendency for a dancer to sort of say that, what, this is not something I want to participate in. And it was only thrusted upon me, so I would like to just, the first
Mm.
opportunity I get, I would just rebel and say, this is the first thing I want to get rid of in my life. So
Yes. Yeah.
I am just,
Well,
that's where I am.
I feel that, and I sympathize with you very, very much, because I do feel like somehow people are just, if I could somehow make them grasp the beauty of Bharatanatyam, then they would love it, and they would love it just as much as I do. But I think it's also really important to accept that art forms do go in cycles. Bharatanatyam may go into a decline and not. I don't see that. In fact, I see the best dancing I have. I mean, pure dance. In terms of pure dance, the
Right.
dancers who are dancing now are so technically, the speed, the accuracy, the perfection of their movements. I've not with, in my lifetime, this is the apex of that. This is not the decline of that. And I see people doing very interesting experiments with Bharatanatyam and hip hop, for example, like Bharatanatyam with all different kinds of music and um, in all different kinds of settings and situations. So I see a lot of uh, potential to excite um, young dancers.
Right.
And I would look, because everybody likes to be creative. And if you say this is a 2000-year-old dance style, you have to do it exactly like this.
Mhm.
That means you have to stifle your own creative impulses,
Right.
and you have to uh, do what I tell you. But if you make it clear that this is a creative medium. I mean, you yourself said those words. This is a medium that can express anything, anything that you want it to. And you can find ways to use it that effectively make it available to anybody. But also you have to have this feeling that some people will love it, some people won't. Like all things are like that. Like, you know, I took lots of students from SNU to do kalaripayat with my guru in Calicut, and a couple of them continued to do it, and all the rest of them didn't. So the idea that you know, in my class, you have to do Bharatanatyam, and you have to and this is what I want you to get out of it, and make those things that are universally acceptable. And then also be kind of accepting that some people will love it, some people won't, you know, that this is just the nature of art, that it demands your subjective involvement, your involvement as a person. It's not, you know, I use the example of aspirin, but art isn't like aspirin, right? Like aspirin works on everybody, but each art form only works on some people, and it really does require that they experience that sense of engagement with it. And so yeah, you know, I'm kind of expecting you to answer that question rather than me. How are you going to engage your students? How are you going to make it something that they want to do? You're going to have to find those ways, and every time you know, each class is an opportunity for you to figure that out.
Right, absolutely. I think you're right. And right before we started with this interview, you and I were talking about the different tools that exist today for dancers and educators to try and engage the students beyond what was possible before. And because this is research that is going on currently, and it's an active
Mm,
research, so it gives us, you know, ready-made tools that can be implemented just right away, and the results can be seen in the class that you're conducting itself.
yeah.
That is definitely there, but I think only time will tell where this is all leading and
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
going to come out of it. Living in it currently, we can just sort of, you know, wait for it to reproduce itself into whatever it is that is coming out as.
right.
On that note, I have the most important questions I've been waiting to ask for the entire time of duration of this interview. You have recently written a book called The Girl Made of Gold, and I attended one of the interviews. I'm still waiting on my copy, and I'm so excited to read it. I do remember attending the interview where you talked about this book a little bit. So I know, as a matter of fact, that it is a work of fiction, but it definitely has its roots in reality. So could you tell us a little bit about the book, Girl Made of Gold? Where did you get its inspiration, and what can the audience members expect out of it?
So, you know, at a certain point in my life, I thought, okay, I'm going to do a PhD. And I wanted to do a PhD with Phillip Zarrilli at the University of Exeter. And he encouraged me to the topic that we'd come up with was our Bharatanatyam and patronage. Like, what does the patronage system do and affect how the form comes into being? But I never, you know, I was already in my late 40s, I think, by that time. And it just didn't make a lot of sense to me at that time to do a PhD and spend so much money. And in the UK, it was super expensive and everything. So I didn't do it, but I started doing the research then. I started doing the research for that, around that topic. And then uh, um, one day I was at a dinner party with a bunch of my friends, and my very dear friend, V.A.K. Ranga Rao, he told this story that a Devadasi had told him And he was using the story to express how much pride Devadasis took in their community. So there is this exploitation, but there was this exploitation in other forms of life in India at that time as well. So leave that aside, but the Devadasi told the story that in her lineage, there had been a girl who didn't want to go with the patron who'd been chosen for her, and she didn't want to go with him. And so in order to avoid that, she turned herself into a golden statue, a statue made of gold. She had so much power. She had so much power in the way that Hindu women in the mythological stories, they're said to get power from being very chaste wives. This girl had the power inherent from being a Devadasi, not being a chaste wife, but she still had the power, and she turned herself into a gold statue. And as soon as I heard that story, I can't tell you how immediate it was. As soon as I heard that story, a character, this young girl who had this vital energy and belief came to me. And I'd already been doing this research. And so it was like a conjunction of research and this mythological story. And I wanted to somehow make her story, like figure out how did it happen? How did she turn herself into a gold statue? And what are the ramifications? Like, why didn't she want to go with that patron? What were the kinds of, what was the kind of life in which such a story could have been taken for the truth? And of course, the Devadasi telling it to Ranga Rao told it as a true story. She said, this happened to my forebears. It's not a mythological story, it's a true story. It happened. And so I wanted to take that kind of energy and make it into a novel. And I had the idea for that character right in the telling of that story, that young girl who has so much power. You know, she just has this sense of herself. And so the novel kind of evolved out of those two things going on together at the same time. And then I did a lot more research. I did research in the Tanjore District Collector's Office, where they just brought piles of papers to me from that time period. And I just would open up letters, I would open up death certificates, you know, just random documents all brought up in this. In the district collector's office tells you how many people died of snake bite in a certain year, the crops that were grown, the weather, whether there was a flood or there was a drought, and there were epidemics. Like, we think this coronavirus is an epidemic, it's a pandemic, but there were epidemics in Tanjore at a certain time, cholera epidemics, there were famines. And so out of that, all that kind of research, I created a novel. And so the novel tells you how it came to be that a girl turned herself into a gold statue. And it's a murder mystery, because that's my favorite.
I was gonna point that out.
My favorite form of, you know, I don't know. I used to love reading novels. Now I read a lot more nonfiction than I do read fiction. Okay. But when I just want to relax and I just want to become totally immersed in a book, I always go to a murder mystery. Like, if a good murder mystery is just, to me, and I'm living in the generation where people use the murder mystery form, the structure, to tell very complicated stories and tell stories that are full of insight into other qualities of life. So I had to make sure that it was a murder mystery. I wanted to write a murder mystery very, very much.
I think that was one of the biggest things that got me hooked, because I remember in the interview you talked about how you were interested in Agatha Christie books and, the
Mhm.
other authors. And I was like, this is it. This is my book. And I placed an order for it right there and then. So I think that was a very interesting thing. And now that it's a murder mystery, I think everybody should just go ahead and read it, give it a read.
Yeah,
There's a lot
yeah,
of historical reference in the book that stands true, and hence
yes,
can be, used to understand the situation back in the day. Also,
yeah,
because this girl made of gold is a Devadasi herself, there's going to
mhm,
be a lot of reference on the traditions, the customs that did exist at the time. So please go through the book as if it's a fiction, non-fiction, uh,
yeah.
and rather not just a fictional story in itself. There are going to be references and materials that are going to be presented.
Yeah, I try to remain very, very true to the historical details, the historical accuracy to the best of my ability. Like, and all the, every single detail that I've put in there
Right.
has had some, there's some reason why I think that could have happened.
Mhm.
And I just want to mention one more thing. So when I tried to imagine what it might be like to be a Devadasi, knowing that the whole institution has gone out of favor, I went to Gokak, which is in North Karnataka, and I met the Devadasis who are there still. There's another, it's not Devadasis like the Tamil Devadasis in the temples, but it's an institutionalized sex work associated with the temple. So uh, religiously sanctioned sex work. That's what I think of the Devadasi, is a translation for what Devadasi. And I met those women. They had the same kinds of um, being publicly available, being available to men for a price. And they talked to me about what that meant for their lives. Girls told me how they had been dedicated at a particular age, but now through an NGO, they had gotten an education and they'd gone and gotten a job in a hotel or as a receptionist or as a secretary or something like that. And as soon as a man found out that she came from that Devadasi community, she would be expected to accept money for sex. So it was something that you could never get away from. That was one thing that I understood from their stories, that no matter how much they tried to escape, they were very often dragged back in through somebody finding out about their dedication. And then the other thing that they talked to me about so freely was the first night was sold at a, basically auctioned off, that, you know that such and such a Devadasi was coming into, she had to have gone through the menstruation. So when she came to puberty, but that first night was considered very, very important. And uh, they would be sold for a high price. And the women were telling me about that experience, and that too. I've put those experiences into the book. Their experience of as they described it to me, because I don't think it would be that different whether you were a Devadasi in a temple in South India or a Devadasi in a temple in North Karnataka. So I want to, I want you to remember that these are based on the experiences of real women.
That is actually quite informative and very important to remember. Please do go ahead and listen to. or what I would say, sorry, read the book because it's filled with content and information. So this has been one of the most interesting, informative, and quite intriguing interviews so far. And thank you so much for bearing up with me and my technical issues. Uh,
No problem.
but I have one final question for you that I would like for you to tell, talk about a little bit. So at the end of each interview, every artist gets a little bit of time to talk about anything that they would like to convey to the audience at large, to the people who are watching this video and who would watch this video in the future. So is there anything that you would like to share as your insight and everything that you have learned and been through in your life? Any kind of learning that you would like to pass on to the future generations?
Okay, yeah, there is. I think that it's very easy to forget the great impact of dance. Dance is so ephemeral. Dance isn't like a sculpture that lasts for thousands of years, and dance isn't like a book that you can read a book that somebody wrote hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Dance is something very immediate, and so there's a tendency to minimize its pleasure, but try to think of a world without dance, and it's simply impossible. No wedding celebration, no intimate dance with your partner, a waltzing with your partner, slow dancing, no discos, nothing, none of the ways. And if you think of what happens on YouTube, like most of it is dance related. People love dancing. And so my main last point is to take that pleasure seriously, to enjoy it, to realize that it has a deeper impact, that we need it, and that we want dance in our lives, and we would be very, very impoverished without dance in our lives. And just because it doesn't last forever, it's even more precious and more necessary for us to take it seriously and to involve ourselves with it. It lives within us, and we're so lucky to have it. And I've always thought about dance like when you buy a painting and you put it on the wall, your work of art is outside you, but when you learn a dance, that work of art is inside you. You almost can't have any other kind of art so within you and so much a part of you as dance. So that's my last word.
Thank you so much, Geeta ma'am, for being part of this entire interview process. This was one of the longest interviews I've done, and probably one of the most productive ones as well. I got to learn your firsthand experiences. I got to learn a lot that you have done for the community and everything that your research that you put into this field, and also Girl Made of Gold, which I'm looking forward to.
Okay.
So, having said all of that, thank you also for pointing out and talking about the need for dancers to take care of themselves, like you did, amongst everything else that you and I touched upon. On that note, I would like to say thank you and goodbye, and I will definitely get in touch with you again very, very soon.
Okay, thank you, Niharika. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk.
Thank you all for tuning into Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world. To continue receiving notifications on our latest episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel Natya Mandalam or look us up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more information. I'm your host Niharika, and I'll see you all next time.